Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. My name is Kristen Harcourt, and I'm your host. I'm an executive coach and professional speaker, and I created this show to have a platform to have really inspiring conversations around what it looks like to humanize work, to be able to transform leaders, and ultimately create workplaces where people can show up as their best selves, be aligned with their purpose, and have meaningful work so that we can have organizations that are really creating positive contributions in the world. And so every 2 weeks, I get together with different guests all over the world. And so this time I'm really on the other side of the world because I'm excited to introduce you to my guest who's here from Australia. So today I'm going to be speaking with Sonya Law, and Sonya is the owner of SL Human Resources Consulting. She's located in Melbourne, Australia. She has 30 years experience in HR management and is super passionate about helping people realize their potential and also creating work environments that nurture both physical and mental health. Welcome to the show, Sonya.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kristen.
So I'm a little bit jealous because it's winter in Toronto and it's beautiful somewhere where you are, but that's okay. If people could see Sonya, because this is a video and audio, she's got a beautiful tan. She's glowing right now, but I know summer is just around the corner here too.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
Sonia, I
Thank
want
you.
to start off. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your journey because I think it's quite fascinating in that you have multiple degrees. You have a degree in teaching, you have a master's, you have done your MBA, and you actually started off as a kindergarten teacher before you got into HR. But I also want to talk a little bit personal as well because you are you're a marathoner, you do triathlons. So talk to me a little bit around your personal and professional journey that got you to where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, live in Australia. Was born in New Zealand. I guess New Zealand's, been a little bit like Canada in that it's very mountainous. We get snow, gets very cold. So it's all about getting into the outdoors and adventure, enjoying your environment. So that's where I got my love for exercise outdoors. So the marathon running, and then been doing for about 20 years, and then triathlon for a similar amount of time. So triathlon's your swim, bike, run. So it's all outdoors in the bay and in the ocean, which I really love. And, it reminds me when I'm out there too about the importance of preserving our environment so that we can participate in these activities, which is really important to me. It really, one of my first jobs, I worked at the checkout in the supermarket, and I was there for 5 years, and I noticed that people were queuing up with their trolleys at my cash register, but other cash registers were free. And I said to them, you can go to somebody else. You don't need to wait for me. And they're like, no, we want to talk to you. So it was really sweet. And a lot of people said to me, my mum said, you should go into HR. You're really good with people. They like talking to you. And I thought that was a really important quality in a HR manager, that you're approachable, that people open up. And you can, talk with them. So I went into a HR degree and started out in quite an entrepreneurial job. So I was given a telephone book and said, build a business in terms of recruitment. So I went and knocked on doors, and, you get lots of rejections, but I certainly cultivated my resilience very early on in my career. And I learned as a consultant to ask a really broad question of, tell me about your business. And then I just was very quiet. I just learned to listen and took lots of notes, and they would show me their production line, because I've always pretty much been in manufacturing and engineering, because my dad was a mechanical engineer. So I'm very interested about how things work, and particularly in, the end product. So I found myself working in that space. Then I moved up to what is the Gold Coast or Queensland. It's a state here in Australia, which is very sunny and beautiful, in my 20s. And I met a lot of holistic people in terms of natural therapies, chiropractors, got a personal trainer, really found sort of health and well-being. So that's really shaped my approach to working with people as well as a HR manager, because I see the person first in terms of, you know, their not just their physical self, but their mental health and their well-being and self-care, and what are they doing, you know, from nutrition and exercise and all the way through. So because I believe if that's, you know, if you're keeping house good in the body first, well, then everything kind of stems, you know, from that. So then I began a family, and I was definitely a mother who, pre having my son Jackson, I was not sure how I would be, because I was very much a businesswoman. And I sort of was literally my meeting, you know, when I was going into labor, and I was like, I've got to go to the hospital, have the baby. Okay, I'll be back. So, but I found I sort of really got all these feelings of wanting to sort of nurture this child. So I decided to take a maternity leave, which is 12 months here in Australia. And I did a degree in teaching in early childhood. I really wanted to understand this small baby, how the brain develops, how they develop, and how I could support this child through their early years, because I'd had such a good experience myself in New Zealand in those formative 6 years, which really establishes, you know, the personality and, you know, the way you sort of live your life. So became a kinder teacher, absolutely loved it. I really found my people. 3-year-olds are my people. They're fun. They love learning. They absolutely love learning. And when you spark that interest in them, it is extremely rewarding as a teacher. And I would, you know, notice that spark and then apply the program around them. So it wasn't a rigid program. And that's probably my approach as a teacher as well. It's good to go with people's passions and interests and sort of flame the fire, so to speak, which is around that Montessori type teaching and Steiner and so forth. It's very tactile, it's very practical, because people's learning styles are very different. So I, as a facilitator, like to adapt to the different learning styles, so that they learn best. So then it was, you know, child's getting older. By this stage, I had some stepchildren and wanted to re-enter the corporate world, and noticed that the boardroom wasn't too different from the sandpit. You know, it's like, wow, they said they actually hired me because I had worked in a kindergarten and there were some behaviours that were resembling of early childhood. So I thought that was quite humorous. So yeah, with all respect, I came into the boardroom and facilitated a lot of courageous conversations when I re-entered, and helping people to understand how to sort of, you know, interact so that we could be productive and efficient and make good decisions. And that was, the big move really was to sort of Hitachi further sort of down the line. They were initially owned by United Technologies Group, and then next private equity, and then now Hitachi. The Japanese have had lots of different owners, but yeah, really sort of solid sort of leadership team. So it was good to come back to HR and then sort of exercise, you know, the understanding the person holistically. And looking after their health and well-being first, and then creating a safe place for them to work and to realize their potential and adapting to their various learning styles. So I've been very, very fortunate really to have had that experience.
Wow. I love the diversity, and I see so many parallels all the time between parenting, raising children and raising employees in beautiful ways, right? Just as you described that if you really tap into people's gifts and talents and allow them to be creative, we don't suddenly stop being creative as adults, that we don't want to be able to play and create and use our gifts and talents. That doesn't shift because we become
No.
adults. I just think some organizations and workplaces don't actually support those gifts and talents in an environment where they can do that. One of the things that shows up for me, Sonya, I remember when we had our initial conversation, I was so intrigued by our shared passion around what it looks like to put people first. And then when you put people first, how it has a huge impact on the ability for everybody to work together. And we were even talking about when there's conflict and why there's conflict and when people aren't getting along, or where we might say people are acting out and there might be behavior issues. Again, reminding me of kindergarten, the reason why they brought you in, because some of those behavior challenges. And it was so awesome as to use you as a case study, Sonya, around what happened when you came in. And so talk to me a little bit around that, because the organization looked a certain way and there were some behavioral challenges happening and dynamics at play. And there were some specific things that you did to really shift what was happening in that workplace. So I'd love for you to share some of that experience.
Yes, yeah. I think the first thing was really like role modeling is always role modeling the right behaviors, and that comes from the top. So that's the CEO and HR. HR really set the culture of an organization. So consistency, I think, in the way that you behave. Um, it was a great compliment that people would say, we know what we're going to get when we speak with you. You're the same all the time. So that consistency equals safety. So it's really important that, we make people feel safe, and expression or anger, or what the behavior is not a bad thing, but it's about getting to the root cause of that frustration and understanding from their perspective. And that's really the skill, is having trust and holding a safe place for people so that they open up and to really listen authentically, to find out what actually drives them and what motivates them. We used the 5 whys. Why, which is pretty much how you get to the root cause. Not an intrusive way, just a quiet way. So working with individuals, and then when you're with a group of people, it's calling out the behavior in a respectful way, and just taking a pause to particularly in the boardroom, if that's occurring, and to also give people an opportunity to do some work on themselves. So get some self-awareness as to what their particular style is, what their style is within the group, and in order to have innovation and achieve our goals, what sort of behaviors do we need to commit to, where it's about the group goals and the company objectives, not about individuals and our own potentially our own ego. It's really about, well, what's best for the company and how can we facilitate these conversations, these decisions, in order to have a successful business. So it's really at an individual level, and then in group settings, self-awareness, education. A lot of it is really, really listening and getting the relationship to a point where you can give some feedback in the nicest possible way that respects that person, but also delivers sort of a message about how they could potentially do things differently next time, or try that out. That then empowers that person. They have a choice as to whether they're going to take on that feedback and try it out. So that's a really big part of that situation. The person needs to be open, have a growth mindset. We discussed what that looks like. Be open to feedback, and then cultivate their own resilience in the journey as well, because it's not all smooth sailing. In order to develop ourselves, personally and professionally, it does require a certain amount of vulnerability. And that can be, that can bind people together, but it can also push people into corners as well. So it's sort of like a contraction expansion sort of scenario. But if you're well intended and you come across in the genuine in the right way and with compassion, people are quite open and receptive to it, because then they're not feeling limited and stuck in that space, and they learn to kind of flow with the organization as opposed to being rigid and not really enjoying, their work life.
Mm-hmm. Wow,
Mm.
so much valuable stuff with what you just said there. And I always kind of try to take on the hat of I'm hearing a CEO or I'm hearing an HR leader that's struggling with some of these things. And so
Mm.
let's help them to understand. And you've done a really good job of really understanding and helping them to understand it's the individual and helping them understand how they're part of the team and what you're trying to create together.
Mm.
So imagine somebody is in an organization where there are some of those behaviors that are happening that aren't aligned with the values and who they're trying to be and what they're trying to create as an organization, right? Because we know values, we've all seen this, where we see the values, but the behaviors that are part of those values are not actually showing up in the organization. And there's not really any accountability for, it's kind of like, well, that person does their job really well, so we're not going to necessarily, that's just who they are, right? We kind of throw it off. And so that's something that I'm strongly passionate about, is not okay, and we need to do something to address those behaviors. And so I like what you said there, to help that person feel the trust so that they can start to share. And when you're asking the questions with the why and all of that kind of stuff, I'm wondering if you think about people on their self-awareness journey, and there's some
Mm.
people who are more in the middle or further along, and there's others who are very much near the beginning of their
Mhm.
their self-awareness journey. What are
Yeah.
some of those ways that you are able to create that safe environment where they're going to be vulnerable so that they are willing and able to do some of the inside work, because it's very uncomfortable at first, right? And so what are some of those ways? I'm thinking of those people who are a little further on the other side of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
self-awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to take interest in them as people and in their role and what they do within the business, and I mean, I'd sort of invite myself along. I said, oh, can I, go into some of your group meetings or your one-on-ones, or can we have a one-on-one once a week? Can you just talk to me about what it is you're doing in your role or within your team if they're a manager? And really just to listen. Listening's a big part of it. It takes a while, actually. You can't really go straight in and give direct feedback without first establishing and understanding what their role is, because that behavior, there may be a reason for it, and so it may be just tweaking it a little bit. So um, it's really coming from an understanding first, and then getting to a point where you have got that safety and that trust, and they're taking your counsel, and they're almost at that point of art, really they're asking you for feedback.
Yeah.
That I observe or I notice, and I can see the you're saying to them, they're the piece of the puzzle, of how the organization functions. It what would happen if we tried this? So I mean, they're mostly engineers that I work with, so it's encouraging them to tinker a little bit with
Mm.
their approach and to see what the outcome is. And they really like that sort of trial and error, and but it's really taking it back to establishing a very good relationship where you're very much listening, and you only give them little bits of
Mm.
feedback, along the way, to the point that then they ask you what would you say you've always been good enough to give me feedback, or honest enough, or I haven't had that before. So they get to a point where they're kind of almost using you like a coach,
Yeah.
but that definitely takes time, and that's a human to human connection and emotion and feeling, that's been transmitted sort of over a period of time. So when you say people are sort of early in their journey, they just may not have been in that sort of coaching type relationship before. They've been directed, and that's why they've been pushed into a corner and they've stuck with their default. But when you sort of lead them in sort of really gently and you're genuine, they tend to be more, more sort of responsive.
Yeah,
And
I think
sometimes you
that
can tweak.
Yeah, I think that so many valuable points because in this busy world and people wanting to make things happen quickly and efficiently and move right into action, and we're in this whole instant gratification world that we want everything like this, and it doesn't actually work like that. And so I think that what you said is so important. We talk about listening all the time and what it
Yes.
looks like to be fully present and actively listen to people. I would put it out there like 50% of leaders are probably not doing that. So there may be 50% that are really doing that. They think they are, but to actually be fully present and actively listen, not listening so that you can respond with what you're going to say, but really truly hearing that person and making them feel seen and heard. And we all know what that feels like when we're really feeling like someone's genuinely making us feel seen and heard. They're like giving us all of our attention, and then coming from a place of curiosity to understand and asking more questions. It's
Yeah.
it's like night and day. It makes it, no matter who the
Yeah.
person is, it feels so different.
Yeah, and the business has created that environment. So when someone acts a certain way, it's just not them personally. The environment has created that so that they think that their perception is that they need to operate in that way. They
Yes.
just haven't realized that they don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So that's when they need that sort of feedback. But you do have the CEO, saying, come on, we just need that person on this page, like straight away. Like you said, it's very rushed. It's very much the HR person almost like fending as well. Like they just, need a bit more time, and then explaining from that person's point of view where they're at and why they operate that way. And then, that's when the tweaking comes in. But it's being conscious that it's never one thing. It's a very people are complex, and it's often an environment.
Yeah.
It takes so long for them to get to that point. So it takes equally
Yeah.
amount of time to get them back to how they should be operating.
Yeah.
It's like when you change jobs, you're one way in one job and one environment, and then you change jobs, and people do leave because of cultures, but they find their tribe, they find their environment, and then they flourish. So it's really finding, that sort of happy medium where they're delivering the best potential in themselves and in the organization. It's art. Science and
Yes.
art.
Yes. And it feels like that's also how HR can be the bridge to the CEO to help them
Yes.
understand, right? To
Yes.
understand that this is what it looks like and this is why we need to be a little bit more patient. And then also help and teach our other leaders how to do this, because it should never be just HR. HR is modeling it. And
Yes.
because even when I hear people say, well, HR owns culture, no, like all of us own culture. Like we're every day as we're showing up as those leaders. But if
Yes.
the leaders aren't being given any help around what does it look like to coach an individual, not to be directive, not to tell them what to do, to ask that person questions so that
Yes.
they can come to their own realizations and insights and reflect things back to them. I have to give the leaders credit if nobody's pulling them aside and giving them any training or information.
100%. 100%. And they haven't, and particularly technical people haven't necessarily had the soft skill training nor the time or the energy for reflection. So it's, the first thing I would do is like an emotional intelligence survey to get them to get some awareness of, where they're at on the journey and the continuum. And there's no good or bad. It's all perfectly fine where they're at. But can get a bit of an idea where the gaps are, and then go through that kind of with them in a non sort of personal judgmental way, but just say, look, this is where I see it, and this is where you could do some more work. And often it's saying it's okay to connect with people on a human level. It's okay to say to them, how can I support you? What support do you need? and to ask those really broad questions. We sometimes come to those meetings with employees feeling like we've got to have a script, we've got to know what to say, and often it's better when we don't. That we're relaxed, we're ready to listen, and we can, find out really what makes them tick and what enables them to be their best self at work. And then you get a really connected, loyal person who would even be willing to suffer stress for you, in terms of if you're wanting them to work longer hours or they're being overworked at the time. It's amazing what people will withstand if they know that you've got their back. They feel safe, they feel heard. They will give you all the loyalty in the world. You'll extract so much more. And this really has a bottom line impact to, in the way that I'm expected to be reviewed in terms of revenue per head count, which is essentially you've got your head count, this is how much money you're making and how much are you making, per person. And I was in a global organization where we're being, marked against, other countries. And that discretionary effort that literally hits the bottom line is about connecting with people on a human level, what makes them feel safe, what makes them, work hard for the company. I mean, you get better productivity, you get reduction in absenteeism, you get a reduction in turnover, you get more engagement. They're going to be delighting the customer because they're happy in their job, and then that could lead to another referral or more sales. So I think it's just often my role is to make that connection to shareholders and to business leaders who are really, it's all about numbers, and it is, financial sustainability is an important part of business. But it's connecting them to the fact that if you do this work at a leadership level and create this culture, then everyone benefits. And that's what drops out, the bottom line. Because often people don't understand their piece in the puzzle of an organization. And then that can build some frustration. So it's helping them to see what their piece is in the vision or the mission of the company. And extracting as much as possible from people because they're a resource, so that they feel excited to come to work, and it becomes like a family to them, and make it very hard for them to leave then.
Well, it's so true. And as you were saying that, the other thing was showing up for me is that the way you can connect them to the purpose around what the contribution that they're making in that work, right? Just like you were saying, the puzzle piece, right? If they don't see how what they're doing is contributing to something bigger. And these days, in terms of, I love the way work has really shifted, like in terms of social responsibility and B Corps and all of that. Like, people want to work for organizations that are contributing to making positive changes in the world, right? And I know for myself, those are questions that I'd be asking now. Why am I going to work with this organization? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to solve in the world? How are you positively contributing?
Yeah, and that's how I start with getting the right people in. So my first conversation with a candidate is literally conversation. What are your values? What's important to you in your personal life? And to get a sense of them as a person. And if there's an alignment to our values, then we'll go forward to the next stage of having all their skills and experience. And of course, you do some testing and you do your panels and you do all of that stuff. But the first conversation, I want to get a sense of who they are. Yeah, and how they live their life.
Yeah, it's so important for both parties, right? Because they're not going to be happy at that company if it's not the right fit for the values that they want to be living and breathing every day. And then it's not good for the organization because they're not going to stay. It's not going to feel good. And then I think also, because again, you know how passionate I am with leadership, you want to make sure that they're going to have leaders who are going to help create environments to bring out those values and behaviors and coaching and development and personal growth, because we all crave that too, right? We want to feel like we're growing and learning and evolving in those organizations we're working in.
Absolutely, because people, leave, as we know, leave managers. They leave cultures because they don't feel like they fit. So if those two things aren't there, it's very difficult. If they don't feel like they're being rewarded or recognized or promoted, So often I would get feedback from a hiring manager saying they're just, they haven't made it through the interview process. So I would then get the feedback from the manager and then communicate that feedback to the employee, in a way more like a development plan. So these are the gaps, and they're usually actually soft skills, a little bit the hard skills, but usually soft skills. So then I would coach them because the position comes up again. And then the next time they went for the job, they'd get the job. And it's the most thrilling thing, really. It's my favorite thing is taking someone from where they don't get that promotion, using that feedback and then coaching them for a few years, because it does take a few years for the job to come up again. But when you stay in organizations like I do, you can see that. You can see people get better.
Yeah.
And it's extremely thrilling when they take on that feedback and they mature and then they get the job. It's just the best.
Yeah.
And they become the best manager.
Yeah.
Because they say to people, I didn't get that job straight away, but I worked on myself and I took the feedback and I grew, and now I'm the branch manager, and they become the best manager.
Yeah.
They're brilliant.
Yeah. Because they're also sharing their experience with others, which is that vulnerability and connection, right? Because they let other people know, hey, this is what my journey looked like. And now they're giving back. It's like when you gave that feedback, it ripples because now they're giving back to the other people in the same way you did for them.
And it's storytelling.
Yes.
Telling stories. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a big part of organizations, because people, before they join a company, will often try and find out, what's that culture like, and see if we can get some stories. So the stories that we tell are very important in organizations.
One thing I want to circle back, Sonya, and not lose in our conversation when it comes to feedback, because I see that you're very comfortable with feedback. You're very comfortable giving feedback, but for others, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I am a big fan of radical candor, but I'm also conscious of, I've heard of several situations actually this year where radical candor is not being used in the way Kim Scott intended it to be, which, radical candor is supposed to be both kind and both direct. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, using radical candor in the right way, what does that look like? Like, how can, how can an individual leaning into radical candor be more effective in the way that they're delivering feedback or making feedback something that's happening on a regular basis? And I'm focusing a little bit more on the constructive feedback, because I feel like positive feedback tends to be easier for people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's I mean, it's hard, isn't it, to receive feedback? It really is. You're opening yourself right up. And so the practice of asking for feedback means that you're going to get easier at receiving it, and you're going to get better at giving it as well, because you know what it feels like when someone's giving you feedback. You know what it feels like when they did it well. And you know what it feels like when they didn't do it so well, and the words they used and the emotion and all of that. So I think first, to be able to give good feedback, you have to be someone that asks for feedback.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, really important. Because I connect with people on a personal level and want to understand their story when I work with them, their real story. I had a woman who, she lost a son in a workplace accident. He died of electrical shock at 19. And when she applied for the job, I said, why are you applying for the job? And she said, so I can keep my 4:30 appointment every day. And I took the time to ask her, where do you go at 4:30 every day? And she went to his gravesite every day, to the cemetery. And she said, your branch is very close to there, and it means that I can go there for to visit Alex. Now I created opportunity in such a safe environment for her to really kind of open up to me very early. And I generally do have the good fortune of understanding people's stories. They will tell me what their story is. And what I notice is when they come up for promotion, because she came up for a promotion, is that she has walls up because she's been hurt before. She's suffered trauma. So for her to put herself out there and promote herself in an interview is very uncomfortable. So, and, to kind of, she had really good skills, and everyone in the branch wanted her to become the branch manager, but she'd kind of had all this kind of stuff up, and, I mean that walls up. So in order for her to present herself in the right way, interview had to get her to a point where she could communicate, both in the body language and in language, why she's the best candidate. And that actually was very difficult for her to do, because it's quite a vulnerable thing when you put yourself out there for a job. You know what it feels like when going for a job. Do they like me? Don't they like me? Am I going to get it? Am I not going to get it? It's this most terrifying thing. Even for me as a HR manager, I find it extremely terrifying to be interviewed and to, so it's understanding that it can be people have different levels of vulnerability. So I said to her simply that, I've noticed when you come up to the interview that kind of get really sort of, you're not talking about all the good qualities, and I see all these amazing qualities that would be great in a manager, because you're so compassionate because of your experience, and you work really hard and you have great technical skills, but you're not communicating that. So it's explained to them, I understand that the walls are there and they're there to protect you, but this is the time to let that down in order to show yourself. And so they're trusting you, and then they try it in the interview, and then they progress in the interview and get the job. And then she came back to me and said, thank you so much for coaching and guiding me through that experience, because it was really uncomfortable for her and sort of unnatural. But you first need to understand people's story. Now that differs depending on how open people are, and and the size of the organization. I completely understand that, but it becomes a story. So people know then that, HR have worked with them in an authentic, genuine way. And there's so many examples of them, getting promotions or being seen. HR people or are quite good at being seen and communicating their ideas and, what they can do and what they can offer. But it's not natural for people. So when you're giving the feedback, it's in a very sort of humble way, giving them the feedback in a very compassionate, respectful way. And if you can share something about yourself, like, I know this is really difficult. Like I've had the same experience. You sort of it requires you to share first. So in order to give feedback, it's really empathizing. But when feedback is not given in a very good way, the person is usually very busy. They don't see the person. They're speaking, but they're not really connecting on a human to human level. And so it just comes off as poor, bad feedback. So the worst situation is the person doesn't take it on. In factual sense, the feedback was probably quite good. But it's the way it was delivered, and then the person's not receptive, they don't take it on, and there's generally not another opportunity to do that. Once that person's dismissed that, I don't need to take that feedback on because it doesn't connect with me, then they're completely stuck. Then it's quite hard to go back a second time and say, look, that feedback was sound, I'm sorry you've had that experience, let's try again. It's like, we've kind of already been there. We've opened up that wound, and now it's kind of getting really abrasive, and you can see the resistance, and they're kind of moving back in their chair, and it's sort of a very difficult one. So being someone who is first open to feedback so that you get the experience of kind of what it feels like is really important. It's a tough one, but people leave organizations because they don't get promotions. no one took the time to give them the feedback as to why they didn't get it. But
Yes.
imagine if you deliver it in the right way, you keep that person. They might not get the job the first time, but they get it the second time.
Yeah.
And then you've got this person who's going to be able to do that themselves with their own team and their own people. That's really legacy stuff, and that stays within the organization. It becomes their story, it becomes the way that they do things, it becomes their culture. um, that you might not get the first time, but if you take the feedback and you do the coaching, you work on yourself, you'll get it. It happened to me. It's really powerful. Like, it's not the CEO or HR manager telling them that. Other people tell them, employees, people who work there. And they're really the people that make organizations. For HR, we're in service of people. We unblock things and help them to realize their potential, but we're in service of people to get the best out of them. And then it's to understand that that's our job to help and support people. And if we get the best out of them, then we're doing our job properly.
Mm.
It
I
takes
just,
care.
Sonya, I love the way you describe that. I think you just described it so beautifully because it's kind of nuanced, and the way you explained it was just so well done, because that's the part. It's the way it's being delivered. And when there's the humanity in it, and you again, it's going back to the whole, like, not only listening, but slowing down and pausing the process and really being in there and recognizing this is this connection moment with you and that other human. It changes the energy. It shifts everything that happens in that conversation. And I really, really appreciate the way that you describe that. Because I think that's what happens. It's that even they had good intentions around and wanting to deliver some feedback that would be really helpful. It wasn't delivered properly. And then it was such a lost opportunity. Or I'm just thinking of a scenario that showed up with one of my clients last week. The feedback is given and it's confusing. So sometimes the feedback might be given, but there's
Yes.
it's not concrete. So they can't do anything with it. I remember it was something around being told, you need to show up more as a leader and build your influence. And she said, but what does that mean? Like, can you give me examples? Like, I need to tactically understand what that looks like. And then it's so disheartening because I remember her asking several times and then no other information was given. And so then it's like, well, so it was, again, another lost opportunity. Like, you need to help that person understand what that looks like, paint the vision, do the
Yes.
storytelling, like you're saying, show them the story. This is what this looks like in action. Now they have a vision, they have something to work towards. Oh, they're energized and inspired.
Yeah. And then they run towards it with both hands because they know very clearly what they have to do, what they have to say, how they have to behave, and it actually works.
Yeah.
Actually works.
Yeah.
It's just the best.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than recruiting from your internal promotions are the
Yeah.
best story.
Yeah. Sonya,
Shareholders like it too.
yes. I knew this was going to be like this. I feel like, honestly, we could just keep on talking on all these different topics, but be recognizing, I know, listeners, that you have a certain attention span and you have lots on your plate. And so I appreciate that. And you've just shared so much valuable insight, Sonya. As we start to finish off today's conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to leave your final thoughts with the audience. So it can be on any topic. When you think about leadership, when you think about health and well-being, when you think about reaching your potential, anywhere you want to go, what's showing up for you in this moment that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, I think it's being a lifelong learner is really important. I find I learn most from other people and their experience. They teach me something every day. So definitely opening yourself up to learn and to be curious, to ask questions why, things are happening, how things work and sort of fit together. Is really important. Understand the whole landscape. So yeah, being open, being learning, being curious, and resilient. Yeah, because you're going to get the sort of ups and downs. So cultivating resilience is, really important, and a positive outlook doesn't go astray.
Yes.
There's always some perspectives. There's always someone worse off, and so perspective is always important. That really helps you to get out of the way of oneself. To be kind and compassionate to people is a really good place to start.
Beautiful. I love that. And Sonya, where can people learn more about you and the work that you do in the world?
Yes, certainly. I can have a look on LinkedIn, my site. I publish my articles on various topics around the pandemic and engagement and empowerment and culture and performance, which is a huge passion of mine. And I'm soon to launching my website. So that's coming soon too.
Wonderful, wonderful. I highly encourage people to connect with Sonya. And for everybody who's listening, there'll be show notes on the website where you can learn more about Sonya. And please check out other episodes and go on to Apple Podcasts, write your reviews so that more people can discover this podcast that has been growing organically. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here, Sonya.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonya.
Bye.